several parts of the world, bank runs have accelerated over the past few days after banking systems mysteriously started to go offline, raising fears that a potential system collapse is looming as geopolitical tensions rise all across the globe. Those who still think that these recent bank outages, closures, and disruptions were isolated events that will soon be fixed will probably be unpleasantly surprised to discover that this is part of the new normal. We have a lot to discuss today, so please don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel to keep updated with future videos. Conditions in the financial system are making many people lose their trust in banks, especially now that interest rates hikes threaten to unleash a credit crunch similar to what happened during the 2008 financial crisis. But problems in the financial world go way deeper than most people think, and that's an extremely alarming situation for consumers who don't even know what they're truly in for. All over the world, and particularly in the United States, Canada, the UK, and China, thousands of bank branches have been suddenly closed since the burst of the health crisis. Banks say this is happening because people are still afraid to leave their homes and have been preferring to make their transactions using online platforms. Operational costs have also been going up, and banks tend to cut on expenses wherever they can. More and more routine transactions are taking place online or on your phone. So as a result, branch traffic is not only down significantly over the years, but it's also changed, explained Greg McBride, the chief financial analyst for Bankrate. In 2020, 2,126 bank branches were closed in the United States, according to S&P Global Market Intelligence. That was the highest number of bank closures ever recorded until 2021, when roughly 3,000 more branches disappeared from the system without further notice. From March 2020 to October 2021, over 4,000 branches were shut down. Nationwide, Wells Fargo closed a net 267 branch locations in 2020. That number escalated to 993 by the end of 2021, according to data released in a report conducted by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Last year, California had the highest rate of bank retail branch closures compared to any other state. Bank shutdowns jumped by 38%, accounting for a net loss of 269 banks. California was followed by Michigan with 247 closures and New York with 221. Rounding out the top five were Florida with 192 and Illinois with 153. This suggests that banks are simply rushing to close as many branches as they can, as quickly as they can, anywhere they can, the authors highlighted in the report. It is true that more people have turned to mobile and internet banking services in recent years, but those don't fully replace physical bank branches, explained Bruce Mitchell, NCRC Senior Research Analyst and co-author of the report. The story that banks are not telling us is that this shift to online services wasn't entirely a choice. In fact, since many local branches were closed overnight, it was the lack of choice that led many Americans to start using online banking. What no one seems to be talking about is that customers are losing access to ATM machines to withdraw their money and becoming increasingly vulnerable to online disruptions and even unannounced freezes on their assets. The closures are disproportionately affecting those who live in rural and remote areas, who oftentimes lack access to mobile banking and have a greater need for in-person locations. For local communities, this has been a total nightmare. For instance, one elderly local said in an interview that he's been struggling to access his account since he doesn't understand how online services work. "I don't use the internet at my age. All the banks have shut down, and now there's only one here in town," said 80-year-old Peter Olverson. I think is a disgrace, to be honest. The nearest bank closed down. Now at the only one that is open, you can't get served anyway because there are so many people going down there. I can use the internet, but I've turned 80 now. Basically, I do make mistakes. When I go online banking, I've got to be careful I don't press any wrong buttons. Bank branches are also responsible for fueling local economies, and many nearby small businesses that managed to survive the past few years are now at risk of closing down since foot traffic continues to decline. And although that itself is a matter of concern, the main problem is that the reduced number of functioning branches and available ATM machines means that many people will not be able to get cash on their hands in case an emergency hits. People will not be able to have access to their savings or regular banking services if an outage occurs. On top of that, new rules backed by several global economies, including the US government, do not require major banks to ensure that communities will have access to cash when their last branch shuts. In Europe, that has sparked some fierce consumer backlash over the past couple of weeks, but strangely enough, this news has not hit the US headlines just yet. In the UK, some dissatisfied customers started to move their money from their accounts and into their crypto wallets, while others engaged in a bank run to take their money out of the system. As a result, several banks have seized people's assets and crypto portfolios amid growing fears that bank runs would continue to occur on a faster, greater scale, according to a recent report published by MarketWatch. To make things worse, banking insiders are warning that 700 to 800 branches will be closed this year in the United States alone, as high street banks continue to cut costs and attempt to speed up the process of digitalization, they said. There are going to be a lot of disappointed small businesses and angry branch-dependent customers once new branch closures start getting announced, said one banking source, adding that, as a result of the new rules, they're going to think a white knight will come rushing to their rescue and insist that banks will fund the installation of a new cash machine in their community, or even a new style banking center that all bank customers can use. But it won't always be the case. The source also noted that in some cases, legislation has already been put in place to support these new rules. Banks will always look at ways to spend as little as possible on funding alternative banking services, he outlined. With all things considered, it's understandable why so many people out there have started to rush to withdraw their money from their accounts before more mandated interruptions are imposed by government authorities. In Canada, the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act last week, which is an exceptional measure for the enforcement of legal orders that would be otherwise considered illegal in a normal situation, for violating basic natural human rights, which are usually protected by the Constitution. As an immediate effect of the Emergencies Act, banks were authorized to freeze the bank accounts of anyone with an alleged connection to the recent demonstrations without the need for proof or legal judgment. But extensive outages in the country's banking system, reported just before the official announcement was released, suggest that the act was actually put in place to avoid widespread bank runs. Many local reports say that Canada's banks mysteriously went offline last week as millions of people started to try to withdraw massive amounts of cash from their accounts. This week, 5 banks in Canada, the leading ones in the country, went offline out of the blue, Tech Story reported Thursday. They faced a major outage of almost 5 hours, blocking access to their primary functions. Online and mobile banking facilities were said to be out, along with access to e-transfer for the customers. Banks mentioned technical difficulties in processing transactions, but on Twitter, Canadians told their own version of the story. System overload. 1 million Canadians decided they don't quite trust the banks anymore now that Trudeau is in charge of them. Was there a bank run? One user questioned. Do you think people will keep their money in institutions that now can easily freeze it from them? Another one answered. Meanwhile, in the United States, the government is afraid that the geopolitical conflict between Russia and Ukraine will lead to further disruptions in the operations of our big banks and utility facilities. Officials have been urging U.S. financial institutions and other critical infrastructure sectors, such as electric utilities, to be on alert for any potential cyber attacks. In short, as banking services enter the new digital era, customers are likely to face many more unexpected disruptions, considering that with one simple government order, they can totally lose access to their funds, and that the system is not shielded from cyber attacks and fraud. The truth is that banks aren't known for investing in damage control, but for spending their way out of a crisis after it bursts. The world's population is just now realizing that the system is much more fragile than it seems, and that in fact their wealth is not protected in their bank accounts. People typically put their money into a bank for a reason, to keep it safe. But if politicians can suddenly freeze your money for not complying with their rules, or if banks themselves cannot guarantee protection from fraud and hackers, the only obvious outcome for people is to take their money out and place it where it is safer. It won't be surprising if more bank runs start to occur in the near future. The global population is finally waking up to the reality that those very few people in positions of power can choose to confiscate the money we worked for during our entire lives with no good explanation for it. Keeping in mind that things are going from bad to worse in the financial markets, it's a good idea to start finding alternatives to protect our wealth before it all starts to fall apart around us. Our leaders won't come to rescue us, and it's safe to say that bank bureaucrats most certainly won't either. Thank you for watching.